What is up, Ravens Flock? Huge shout out for your support for the 410 Sports Talk. James and Glenn are the best in the business. They're killing it right now. They love talking Raven talk. Make sure you go subscribe to their channel. Let's go Ravens. Big trust.
Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm James Haskell, along with my co-host Glenn Martin, and a new friend of the show, not an unfamiliar face. Most of you guys are probably used to seeing him on the big screen. Steve Wyche from NFL Network. He's an NFL Network reporter. Steve, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. I'm so excited you guys reached out, brought me on. It's kind of supposed to be the slow pocket of the NFL news cycle, but of course that never happens in the NFL. So I'm excited to join this conversation.
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely. And thanks again for coming on. We certainly appreciate your time. And I want to start with the news that broke today because like you said, even though this is the slow time, the NFL somehow finds a way to dominate the headlines, and they did so again today. They finally cleared up a bit of the mess in their quarterback room with trading Baker Mayfield to the Panthers today. So, who it's funnily enough, they play each other week 1, so Baker will certainly have his opportunity to get back at his former team. Do you think that this is the best they could have done in this trade compensation? I think they got a 5th round pick. Is that as about as good as they could have gotten in this situation?
Well, I mean, it clearly came down to that. I mean, teams were really in no rush. I mean, when you look around the league, is there any team that's really craving for a starter, even Carolina? And then you take on Baker's salary of $18 million, which is an affordable starter's contract, but people just didn't want to pay it. There just wasn't that demand for him. So when they came out and they got that 5th rounder and, $5 million, Carolina's paying $5.5 million of his salary. The Browns are paying $10.5 million. Baker took a $3.5 million haircut. He can earn that back in incentives. But it just went to show you how it was just totally too acrimonious in Cleveland for Baker to go back. He did things with his own contract to get another opportunity. Remember, this is a contract year for him. Okay, so, and this actually, in terms of starting with a team where he's got a chance to possibly win, and because, the NFC South is just not a great division. Yeah. Look, this is probably the best case scenario for him and the Browns. They are what they are, and, whatever the Panthers are doing, they can't figure out what their quarterback is. And as we know, Matt Rule, the head coach, he is on the hot seat coming into the season.
Yeah, it's funny because I keep thinking about the Panthers and their strategy. There's a saying in the world in which I work that sometimes as a sales representative, you show up and throw up. And that's kind of how I feel about the Panthers right now. They're just showing up and they're throwing whatever they can on the wall and seeing what sticks, right? Whatever works out, it just works out. It's definitely interesting because they're paying for Darnold's 5th-year option on top of that.
Yes. And remember, they gave up draft picks to get him. Let's not forget that.
And I think they took a guy in the 3rd round as well. So
they're just throwing. They are in quarterback purgatory and trying to claw their way out of it.
And that's really a tough thing to do. They drafted Matt Corral. Remember a couple years ago, guys, they brought in Teddy Bridgewater to take over as a starter. They get rid of him. They get Sam Darnold. They give up the draft picks. They pick up the option on him. They draft Corral. And now they go ahead and make this move for Baker. I mean, this goes to show you a team that thinks it can win now. They are desperate to be competitive now. There's no long-term planning here. This is, we got to get this right. Even in an era where in the NFC, the talent drain, especially that position, has gone over to the AFC.
Yeah.
So, we'll see how that works out. I mean, Baker Mayfield's a good player. You just have to wonder if everything's in place around him to see if he can go down there and win in Carolina.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. Speaking of quarterback purgatory, the Steelers are in new territory. They're taking on a new journey as far as, not having 7 under center. Of course, Big Ben manned that position for a long time. They go out and they signed Mitchell Trubisky to a 2-year deal. To me, it was a little bit of a head scratcher. I didn't know how much demand there was for him. And then they gave him some decent coin. Then, of course, they draft Kenny Pickett. So curious to know, in your opinion, who do you see as the front runner to win this job?
Well, I mean, I think starting the season to be Mitch Trubisky, but you just never know. I mean, the one thing about the Steelers is they're going to put the best player on the field, right? If Kenny Pickett comes out and he does really well and he has the trust of his teammates, right? That is the important element that often gets overlooked. We talk about skills, hand size, all this other stuff. If your teammates believe in you, Mike Tomlin's not going to be afraid to put him out there. They still have to fix that offensive line to be able to run the ball better. That's been a huge issue with them the past 2 seasons. They've got talent at wide receiver. Pittsburgh seems to always find a way to coach up their wide receivers to deliver. They have a really good tight end. Their defense is good, so they're going to be competitive. I mean, they're not going to go out there and get mopped up, but I think Mitch Trubisky starts the season, and we'll just see how that goes, because there actually was some interest in Mitch Trubisky by teams through the league. Some teams were like, in Chicago, he was just in a bad situation. He did get to the playoffs one year. So there is, he is someone that, is viewed somewhat as a reclamation project. We'll just see if it can happen in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it certainly looks like this is a true quarterback competition and not something that they're going to hand it to Kenny Pickett. And you're right. Look, they still got Mike Tomlin as their coach. And as much as I'm a Ravens fan, I know what that guy, is capable of doing with Mason Rudolph as his quarterback. So I think both of these guys, will be an upgrade over that guy. So, man, I'm still not totally counting them out for sure. But I want to circle back to the Browns because they still have some issues in that quarterback room. And I'm curious, we had some meetings between the NFL and the representatives for DeShaun Watson recently take place. How do you think this situation ultimately resolves? Is he going to play this year, and could the suspension possibly even leak into next season?
Yeah, that's the one thing we don't know. When you talk about those meetings, that is, the NFL presented evidence. DeShaun Watson's lawyers in the NFLPA presented evidence as to whether he should be suspended for the season, and if so, for how long, to a former judge who's kind of an agreed-upon arbitrator between the NFL and the Players Association. We're expecting something to come down. I think she asked for final arguments beginning next Monday. So before training camp, I guess we're expecting to have a season. Look, nobody knows what's going to happen here. There's some people who think, and I know the league would like for him to be suspended for the season, but there's some people who think that they don't think he's going to get that much. So it all depends on how the arguments were taken by this judge, and what evidence there was that could compel this judge to rule. Remember, it's on the NFL's personal conduct policy. You do not have to be criminally charged, and we know DeShaun Watson has not, to face suspension or some type of discipline from the league. So, that's what's interesting. We're talking about the Ravens. We'll get to them. I'm looking at when they play the Browns. They play them week 7 and at the end of the season. I think week 13 or week 14, they may be seeing DeShaun Watson once, if not twice, then. We just do not know if that's going to happen. But clearly Cleveland feels comfortable enough with Jacoby Brissett to hold things down, whether it be for a season, whether it be for 8 games, 10 games, for whenever DeShaun Watson is allowed to come back to play.
Well, let me ask you one follow-up to that, Steve, because we saw this situation start a long time ago, and as the months have passed, more and more information is coming out. There's more women stepping forward. So, I mean, how much do they have to come and take into account that this might not be the end of the information? This might not be the end of the women that are going to come out against DeShaun Watson. I mean, do you think that plays a role in deciding the suspension?
I mean, it could, but I mean, if you're waiting for other people to come forth, I mean, that's something like, if you think in a court of law, if you're waiting for, 4 other people to flip on, some type of narcotics dealer, you can't add that into the equation. You've got to present the evidence that's there in front of you. So you can't necessarily wait. Remember, he just settled 20 of these 24 cases.
Yeah.
So that's something where people said if he did that last year, he could have been traded last year if he would have settled these cases. So how much does that factor into it, if at all? We just don't know. We do not know what the evidence that was presented. We do not know how we'll call her a judge in the situation is going to rule on this. Remember, both sides have the opportunity to appeal as well. And if there is an appeal, the appeal officer is Roger Goodell. Remember, he is now the last line of defense instead of the initial and last line of defense, as was previously the case in the old collective bargaining agreement.
Man, yeah, it's so interesting because precedence is the word that comes to mind for me. And it's hard when I feel like this whole thing is, there's not a ton of precedence for this scenario. It's a unique thing in and of itself. So there's really, it's not like you can refer to this case and that case. Everything would be relatively similar.
Well, I mean, there is, but I mean, it's a slippery slope, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I mean, look, Ben Roethlisberger was not criminally charged, but he had to sit. I think initially for 6 games, it was reduced to 4. Ezekiel Elliott didn't have criminal charges a couple years ago, and I think he ended up serving 6. Remember, he was on the field, off the field, on the field, off the field. But if you do that, if you play that game where you try to bring in precedent, then what's to prevent the NFLPA to saying, well, how come you're not punishing your owner's Daniel Snyder? Or what did, what is the Robert Kraft situation?
Exactly.
How does that factor? So it's a very slippery slope what we're trying to navigate here. So again, nobody really knows. And that is such a domino as to what's going to happen for the season for the Browns and for the rest of the league in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's you're right. Absolutely. It's a huge domino that people are waiting on, certainly the Browns themselves, and then everyone in the NFL, us, of course, having to play them 2 times a year. I thought that week 7 was interesting because if it is a 6-week, that could be his first week back, which certainly could be interesting. But another team in the division in Ohio, of course, the Cincinnati Bengals, just fresh off a trip to the Super Bowl in which they almost came out with a victory. Us as Ravens fans are customarily used to the Bengals being in a certain situation in the division and the Ravens being in another. Now, they've had their ups and downs, and they've certainly broken our heart on various occasions within the division, even when they're
quite a few.
Yeah. Even when they're not having the best
Marvin Lewis era. Yeah, the Marvin Lewis era was like,
it always seems to be that way. But certainly there are a lot of Bengals fans that are making it a foregone conclusion that this team is just going to run through the division and then, it's headed right back to the Super Bowl. But there's a few things that have changed. One, of course, they have the first place schedule where last year they had the last place schedule, and they were the healthiest team in the NFL. So what do you see happening with this Bengals team within the division? And then even further than that?
I think they're the team to beat in the AFC. I mean, I know with Russell Wilson coming to Denver and, some things that have happened, with the AFCs with Buffalo and everything, that everyone's saying those are the teams to beat. When I look at Cincinnati, you talk about two of the intangible things, right? They were the healthiest team in the NFL. You will find that most teams that get to the Super Bowl typically are the healthiest teams in the NFL as the season ends, right? The Rams got all their players back, like going into the playoffs, Cam Akers and all these guys who were injured, right? But to me, they added talent, right? They addressed some issues on their offensive line. They come out, they have a good draft, get a good safety in the draft, to come out and help. Joe Burrow, we keep forgetting, that was his first full season. He was coming off of an ACL, and he worked the league like he worked it. So, yes, and that's a great point you made about playing the first place schedule. And I think they have at least 4, if not 5, primetime games. And I'll tell you guys, one of the things that goes unspoken, I've covered this league long enough. A lot of teams that are not used to playing at night, when they get those primetime games, they don't know how to handle it, right? They're not used to sitting around all day in their hotels and prepping for a lot of night games. It goes from their coaching staff to the players to everybody. I mean, it's just something that the Bengals are not used to. They have to get used to it. I covered the Falcons years ago. They went to the NFC Championship and lost to the Eagles. So next year with Michael Vick, they're on TV all the time at night. They struggled, because so the Bengals had to be mentally tough, right, to be able to do that. And of course, the health and durability is always a factor for any team.
Yeah, no doubt. I can't wait for some of those matchups. I think that Ravens, the secondary particularly, I think have some unfinished business, or at least want to get right back out there as quickly as they can, because Joe Burrow, him and the rest of them Bengals embarrassed the defense, and particularly the secondary of Baltimore, both occasions. And he's been not shy talking about it in this offseason, just nonchalantly talking about all those hundreds of yards he was whipping the ball around for. But recently, Baltimore's secondary was named the best by PFF, despite the fact that the team finished dead last in pass defense last season, which I thought was kind of funny. But do you think that this secondary that Baltimore's built, including adding Kyle Hamilton in the first round, will be enough to slow down some of the not just the Bengals, but some of the other high-flying attacks around the AFC?
Well, I mean, look, secondary and pass rush go hand in hand. You can have the best secondary in the world, but if the quarterback's got 5-6 seconds to throw, he's going to beat him. A good pass always beats great defense. And, look, the Ravens are going to have to slug some games out. We'll get to that later. But I love their secondary. You talk about the worst defense. They were all on IR last year.
Yeah.
I mean, Marlon Humphrey wasn't there. Marcus Peters wasn't there. I mean, Chuck Clark was pretty much it. But now they go out and get Kyle Fuller, one of the best slot guys. They go out and get Marcus Williams, a free safety, who I love. Right, I love him. I watch him a lot with the Saints. He's got incredible range. Right, if there's a bust in coverage, he can clear things up, and that's huge. Depending on how the scheme plays out. Remember, you got a new DC in Baltimore too. How the scheme rolls out and what they're going to be asking him to do. But I think the depth they have there, Kyle Hamilton, to be brought along at his own pace. But he's like such the perfect Raven, man. I mean, come on. When he was there for the draft and he fell to him, I was like, could a dude be more like tailor-made for the Ravens organization than this guy? So, they'll get him up to speed, but they've got to have play up front. You talk about Joe Burrow. We don't know what's going to happen, in Cleveland. We don't know what's going to happen in Pittsburgh, but at some point they're going to get it going, right? Yeah. Both those teams, are going to get it going. So you've got to be able to put pressure. You got to put them in third and long, and then you got to make them think. And then that's when the secondary can work. And that's when you can play games. You can mix up coverages and do some things these guys aren't used to seeing. That's where you get the takeaways. And that's where the Ravens are at their best, is when they get the takeaways. Forget all the yards allowed and all that stuff. You get the takeaways, get the ball back, and if worse comes to worse, you got Justin Tucker, the best kicker in the NFL, to win a ball game for you. And look, that's how the Ravens are going to have to win a lot of games here, guys. Let's not kid ourselves. We can talk about how much, we love the secondary and the guys up front and the tight end and some of the improvements they made up front, getting Ronnie Stanley back. Who's catching the ball, man? This is a league of explosive plays and explosive players. And when you look at the Ravens right now, you're thinking Newt Rockne, Crazy Legs Hirsch.
Come on. Hey, Steve, all I know is this receiving core is better than the one we saw in 2019 when Lamar led the league in touchdown passes, including from the pocket. They were worse.
Who did he throw those to?
Well,
what are Mark Andrews' numbers? They threw him to the tight end.
Well, that tight end's still here.
I know. I'm talking about the explosive. Look, Mark Andrews is that dude. I'm not hating at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, if you're defense, right?
Yeah.
If you're the Bengals, you're the Browns, and you got all these studs, on all three levels, and you come up against some dude who does not put the fear of having to double, or two dudes who can run combos and do motion, who can give you that eye candy look, you're just going to line up and say, we got better players than you. Beat us. So, again, I'm not hating, but these guys have a lot to prove. And look, John Harbaugh is one of my favorite, I think one of the best coaches in the NFL in this era. He finds a way. And then Lamar, they find a way. But if the running backs stay healthy, if Dobbins stays healthy, add Mike Davis, right? He's somebody who can clean some helmets up. Mm-hmm. He's somebody who, when somebody comes to hit him, he can fill a hole and knock him back. Right, so you got some players there. If you get that run game going, you let Lamar do some of the wizardry he can do, then I wouldn't worry so much about those wide receivers. But early on, it's going to be some things they have to work with. You look at their schedule. At the Jets, Miami, New England, the Bills, and Cincy. That's a challenge out of the gate.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we know the Ravens. Come on, I am never going to question that team. Again, I think John Harbaugh and what they do in terms of roster building and absolute character on that building is top notch.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and I think that us at least and a lot of other Ravens fans do lean on that 19 season and think about, okay, if we could do it with that crew, then we can do it with this crew. Really, what a lot of us have been focused on is Ronnie Stanley coming back? Is he going to be healthy? Will Linderbaum be what people have projected him to be? Can Lamar get back? Can just like you said, will the guys that were out come back healthy? That, really what it is at the end of the day. I think the other thing that would be interesting that we've been talking about and will be worth keeping an eye on is those two tight ends that we drafted. We already have arguably a top 3 tight end and the all-pro, in Mark Andrews. And then we draft 2 guys, one in likely that has a lot of shades of a wide receiver in his game as far as his speed and his ability to run up the seam vertically. So that'll be interesting in how they deploy those guys. But one of the things I wanted to ask you talked about the Bengals being the front runner at this point in your mind. Do you think the Ravens are being, generally speaking, do you think that they're being overlooked a bit at this point right now? based on the season that, you can look at the season last year and say, they lost their last 6, didn't make the playoffs. Do you think the Ravens are being overlooked a bit at this point?
Yes, 100%. Because they didn't go out and make the splash move, right?
Right.
When the Bengals went out and got La'el Collins at guard, everyone's like, oh, that's the deal sealer. Well, is it? Is that really going to make them that much better? But because they didn't, they had a really strong draft. And I do think, especially those of us in the media, we take the Ravens for granted. Like, okay, they're the Ravens. We know they're going to be there. But, again, rightfully so. You hear so much about the Bills. Denver with Russell Wilson. The Chargers getting, Khalil Mack and J.C. Jackson. I mean, they're loaded. That whole division. The Raiders getting Chandler Jones to pair with Max Crosby. They get Devontae Adams. Right? So everyone's talking about the AFC West. The AFC North now is kind of, the Colts getting Matt Ryan. I mean, that's a team people better look out for now.
Yep.
I mean, they're a good team, but that dude's a real one. So I absolutely think the Ravens are just one of those teams where, again, especially in the media, we think, okay, they'll be there, but, we'll see him when we see him. We want to give the hype to all those teams that made the splashy offseason moves first and see how those work out, instead of the team that has its way of doing things and is always there. And that's not just the Ravens, it's the Steelers that do it the same way.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Often overlooked as well, I think, in the grand scheme of things when people talk about the AFC. Maybe this year isn't their year, but I think they're overlooked in others as well. So do you look at this division as kind of a 2-team race? I know you give the edge to the Bengals, but do you think that is Jacoby Brissett enough to, with the team around him, enough to get the Browns into competition with the AFC North?
This is a 4-team race. Because first off, you said earlier, Glenn, it's Mike Tomlin, man.
That's
they
true.
Somehow at the end of the season are playing for a playoff berth. I mean, last year, the fact that come on, that they got in with that team.
Yeah.
Right. Cleveland, if DeShaun Watson plays half the games, is going to be there. That team is stacked, right? The only team with, on paper, maybe a more talented roster is the Chargers. And these guys have been together defensively. They're loaded. The Bengals, stacked. Young talent. Trey Hendrickson's a beast. Ravens, stacked. Okay, again, I joked about the wide receivers, but again, they've shown, you talk about the 3 tight end. They're teams that do magic stuff with 3 tight end sets. They get these teams that get these smaller slot corners or slot safeties, and they work them because they've got the tight end stuff to do. I mean, they're masters at offensive mismatches. So all 4 of these teams are going to be – it is hardly a 2-team race. Again, when I talked about earlier, the DeShaun Watson stuff, that's the domino. Jacoby Brissett, if he's got to play all 16 – look, the guy started 60-some games. He's been in some bad situations. He is capable – 17 games. But if he's got to play all 17 and you stack them up against the other 3 teams, I mean, that's where their defense better have 50 takeaways, 4 or 5 house calls on strip sacks and interceptions. And even in that situation, Justin Tucker is the ultimate wild card for the Ravens to win close ball games.
I tell you what, man, it's hilarious walking through the I don't think you'll find another stadium anywhere in the NFL where you see so many jerseys of their kicker. I mean, it's the respect that the fans
He's a rock star.
have. Yeah, it's incredible. But I'm glad Glenn saved this question for me, so I appreciate it, Glenn, because I'm interested to get your take, Steve. It's about Lamar Jackson, and the reason I'm interested to get your take is because I honestly believe, obviously Glenn and I are not privy to the same conversations that a lot of other folks in the media have. But sometimes, I'll be completely honest with you, I do get frustrated because I think that there are people that are building narratives out of close to thin air. Because Lamar doesn't have an agent. He has such a tight-knit camp. I don't know how things are being said or how people are even coming up with these conclusions, right? So Ravens fans are anxious. Lamar's in the final year of his rookie deal. Some people are expecting an extension. Some people are waiting it to or are thinking that it will happen at the end of the season. What's your take on the negotiations or lack thereof between Lamar and, should we be nervous or how do you see this thing playing out?
Well, I mean, not nervous. I mean, look, you have the ultimate trump card in the franchise tag. So, I mean, there's no need to be nervous. It's just really, I mean, look, John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta have been saying it for 2 years. When Lamar's ready, they'll get a deal done. So it does seem like they're rushing, and Lamar's patience, it may pay off. Like Joe Flacco, remember, they didn't pay him. He's a Super Bowl MVP. He gets the big deal. All right, now DeShaun Watson's getting $46 million a year, guaranteed. That's the baseline. Lamar's next. Lamar, Kyler Murray, those guys are next. So him holding his breath and betting on himself a little bit could pay off. At the same time, the injury issue, the durability issue. Lamar didn't practice a ton last year, So you've got those things to factor in. But he seems like the type of guy who knows how great of a player that he is, how special of a player he is, and he's going to bet on himself. It'll get done. It's just a matter of when. I don't think all of a sudden, hey, if it doesn't get done this season, he's going to hit free agency. He's going to get franchise tag. I mean, he's not going anywhere.
Good. Well, that's what I wanted to hear, Steve, because I do not want to see Lamar Jackson playing against the Ravens. That is not something I ever want to see. I don't want to see him putting our defenders on highlight reels that we're going to see forever. Because, we certainly know that some Bengals players will be forever immortalized with that spin move he pulled off a couple seasons ago. But last question. Oh, go ahead, Jimbo.
I have a quick follow-up, Glenn. Sorry.
Yeah,
a quick follow-up to that. Do you see any potential for contention between the two camps eventually as the deal, the longer the deal takes to get done, right? Is there a higher likelihood of some potential contention between Lamar's camp and the Baltimore Ravens, something, because right now it seems like they're lockstep, right? But one of my only concern is that Lamar says, hey, Eric, the easiest thing to do, just pay me a little bit more than DeShaun Watson. And because Lamar doesn't have an agent, he's like, yeah, he does one of those, right? And then Lamar feels some type of way about it, right? So curious to know if there's any higher, increased risks in something like that happening.
I mean, it could. If they say, look, we're not going to guarantee this. I mean, DeShaun Watson was a one-off.
Yeah.
Their owner, because you heard Steve Bisciotti already came out saying, I really wish the Haslams would not have given him a contract like that.
Yeah.
Because, look, Steve Bisciotti is fine cash-wise, but there are owners out there who are not great cash-wise. One in the division, Cincinnati, and one with the Chargers, right? They've got two of the best young quarterbacks who are going to be coming up on these mega deals. And not only if you sign a guy to a fully guaranteed, let's say $250 million contract, which you don't pay him that first year, let's say it's $50 million, you've got to put the rest of that cash in escrow. That's $200 million in cash that has to sit and wait to make sure it's there. Any guarantees in any deal, coach's contract, any player's contract, have to sit in escrow, right? Steve Bisciotti is not going to have that problem. He's loaded. He's got the cash and the liquidity to do that. So I don't think it will get to that point. I just think it could get ugly for a minute. Most contracts do have a little bit of this before they get sealed, and then they get taken care of. So if it gets ugly, it is what it is. And, I know Lamar represents himself, but I'm sure he's got a legal team that also looks over all the paperwork, that if they need to step in and have some conversations, that's the easy thing to do. Because sometimes, player just doesn't want to hear some of the things the team has to say, like, okay,
exactly.
You missed these weeks, 2 years in a row. You only practiced this many times and hurt the rest of our offense because you missed, this many years in a row. Like, players don't want to hear that. It's a reality check that they know about. But it's kind of like, if you love me, then why aren't you just, handing me the bag when I'm such a good player, one of the best players in the NFL?
Yeah, that's always the concern when there's not that middleman. And they have, I can't imagine how nervous or if Eric has to deliver that news directly to the player and not a middleman agent, it's got to be the most awkward conversation, but I'm sure he would find
Well, real quick, remember that's having Bobby Wagner and the Seahawks. Right? Remember Bobby Wagner said he found out that he wasn't being brought back, I don't know, social media, whatever reasons, and that's because they were like, well, he's his own agent. And, the communication was kind of funky and kind of delivering that message to someone who's going to be a Pro Football Hall of Famer and this and that. So, yeah, I mean, it happens.
Oh, man.
Okay, one more came to my mind before you give the last one, Glenn. Sorry.
No, you're good.
You mentioned, Steve, that you covered the Atlanta Falcons for a while, and it sounds like you were there around the Michael Vick era.
I was.
Can you talk to us about, a lot of people make that comparison, but when you think of, Michael Vick and then you think of Lamar Jackson, can you talk a little bit about that comparison? If you see that there is one, or if you see distinct differences, could you speak to that a little bit?
It's a legit comparison. And, I've actually talked to Michael Vick about this. He was 10 years before his time because now you have coaches who are willing to design offenses around your skill set. Michael Vick, he did not have a ton of scheduled runs. It was basically, if he didn't hit his first read, he was making magic happen. It was like, if you do a scheduled run, Michael Vick's a little guy, he's going to get tagged. Well, so he only had a handful of scheduled runs, whereas with Lamar, they've got scheduled runs, and we've got the RPO game. We've got things now set up for quarterbacks. Look at how many mobile quarterbacks are. You can play out of the shotgun and do some things. You can play under center and do certain things. And also, look at the makeup of defenders now. You've got, smaller linebackers, 220-pounders to kind of go up against these guys instead of 250-pounders. So there's absolute similarities. It's just that Lamar has had the benefit of having coordinators and coaches that really tailor their offense and everybody else's skill set, from building the offensive line to the type of running backs they have, to the type of tight ends they have, to fit his strength. And that wasn't necessarily the case with Michael Vick, because when I covered him, he was must-see TV. They were always first in the NFL in rushing and last in passing. When him and Work Done both rushed for over 1,000 yards, and they were all magnificent. But if they needed to if they needed to complete a pass on 3rd and 9, it was grass in the wind. Which way is it going to blow? Not because of his accuracy, but just because the offense had worked one way doing this, and now all of a sudden it's a change in kind of what they're doing.
Yeah, I remember was it Algie Crumpler catching?
It was great.
Yeah. I remember those
great.
days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who could forget when Mike Vick took the league by storm? I think that's something that we all remember well. But Steve, thanks so much for your time. Of course, Steve Wyche can be found on NFL Network covering
we got some
the whole
rapid fire
league.
questions from the fans, Glenn.
Oh, do we? Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, if that's
I'm
all right
sorry.
with you,
Do
Steve.
it. Okay. I love fan questions. I love the fans.
Nice.
Oh, fire
So
round. Okay.
That's right. So DK is going to throw these up on the screen, Steve, and feel free to answer. If you want to plead the fifth, you can do that too. I don't know what these questions are.
Oh, all right.
I don't run from anything.
My man.
Nice.
All right, let's see what you got, DK. So he said, what is it like to work with Steve Smith? Yes.
That is my dude. I love Steve. Right. Okay. So when I covered Steve, when I was, at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and the NFL Network, Steve and I always had a great relationship because, a lot of reporters was kind of scared of Steve. Like, okay, if Steve's in a bad mood, he's going to bite at you, this and that. I was like, he's not going to swing on me. And if he does, I'm swinging back. I may lose, but it's on, right? And so ever since he came in, we've been great. When we work together, it's awesome. There's such a tremendous level of respect. He respects my time in the journalism game. I respect his insight because he's so smart. He's so funny. And I love him. I absolutely love 89, one of my favorite people in the world.
Man, that's awesome. So funny. I knew you were going to say something about, I was like, I hope he says something about him. The fact that he will punch somebody in the face if you cross a line like that. And you kind of got to love that about Steve.
All
right, DK, we're ready.
All right. You have to create a defense
from one end. Who are you taking? Marcus Williams, Jesse Bates, JOK, or Minka? Ooh. They're different types of players because JOK is a hybrid linebacker. So I'm going to exclude him. I'm going to exclude him from this conversation. I would probably take Minka just because Marcus is more of a free safety, right? He's not the guy who's going to come down, rock that running back 5 feet from the yards line of scrimmage. He'll tackle him, but he's not going to, Jesse Bates will. Mm-hmm. Jesse Bates is a hell of a player. He's a hell of a player, but Minka's also that ball hawk. He's the dude who finds his way to get his hands on the ball. So from the takeaway aspect and the fact that teams are really game planning around Minka Fitzpatrick, I'd probably have to go with Minka.
All right.
Hey, we might have Kyle Hamilton in there next year for you if he shows out.
Man, Chuck Clark is nice though, man. Don't stop sleeping on Chuck Clark. He's a good player, man.
He is.
Yeah, we're big Chuck Clark fans. Ravens fans thinking he's going somewhere, I think, are a little misguided. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think how the Ravens stole Kyle Hamilton in the first round of the draft? Wow.
They kind of hit the buzzwords right there, like stole and Ravens. So I'm gonna use 2 words: perfect Raven. Right, from the size to everything you hear about him as a great teammate, like a team first dude who just loves everything about football. He just seems like that guy who's going to lay it on the line regardless of the circumstance to help his team win. And so, again, stole, whatever, but perfect Raven, 2 words.
Nice. Love it. All right. What you got, DK?
Where will Lamar fall in the MVP votes by the end of the year? Top what? Fill in the blank.
Oh, my God, man.
What, 8-3 last year? I think he was right up there, wasn't he? When the
I'd put him like top. I'd put him by the end of this year. I'll put him top 7.
Oh, top 7, Steve.
I'll put him top 7.
Wow.
Well, that's just because like Mahomes and Aaron and Josh Allen. You know, those guys already have such
Brady's
a huge
back.
head start. Brady start, Matthew Stafford. I mean, these dudes. Russell Wilson, he does something. Justin Herbert. But so I'll put him top 7. This is a sliding scale, people. We are not rolling this tape back in December.
We're keeping receipts, Steve.
All right, what you got, DK? Last one. All right, there we go.
Who is my favorite all-time Baltimore Raven? That is easy. Ed Reed. Come on. Number 20, the Hall of Fame safety, Ed Reed. Love Ed. I could have said Ray.
Sizzle.
But I just absolutely love Ed Reed, everything he was about, and the cerebral element, he brought to the game, and some of the conversations we had when he was playing, and now especially that he's not. Always got the cigar
with the hat,
puffing on it, but with the hat, but 100% Ed Reed.
That is
even
awesome.
even though Steve Smith is a 1A, but I give him more of a Panthers residency than a Baltimore residency.
Hey, I'm glad you said that last part because I didn't want you having any problems with Steve.
No, we're good, man. We're good.
That's awesome. We appreciate it once again, man. Thank you for offering your time to us. I know that the folks watching will truly enjoy it. This was a great one. Steve Wyche, of course, you can find every day, all the time at NFL Network, but also on Twitter at Wyche89. If I got that one correct. Yeah, yep. Wyche89 on Twitter. Anything else you're working on? Anywhere else folks can find you, Steve?
No, I mean, same handle for IG. And, we'll look, about 2.5 weeks, you're getting cranked up for the Pro Football Hall of Fame game, Raiders and Jaguars. So NFL Network's coverage starts a slow rollout on the 25th, and then we kick into high gear, I believe, on the 27th or 28th. So, folks, we're about, 2-3 weeks out. It's about to be on and popping.
So excited.
Man, and don't worry. They're going to get Lamar taken care of at some point.
Okay? Oh, thank you. Good.
Appreciate it, man. Have a great one, Steve.